I guess we'll get started. All right, good evening, everybody. So we'll start with the call to order and roll call.
Weedman.
Aye.
Mack.
Here.
Braden. Here. LaCroix.
Here.
Mackey.
Here.
Miller. Here. Strack.
Here. Okay, we have a quorum, so next is the pledge.
The United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, next is the approval of the agenda, as well as the amended personnel report that you should have in front of you.
Second. Miller. Aye. Strack.
Aye.
Mack.
Aye.
Weedman.
Aye.
Braden. Aye. LaCroix.
Aye.
Mackey.
Aye. Okay, next will be public comments. Anybody? Okay. And we're up to John for presentation. First look at the 1920 budget.
Let's try this again. Hello. So it is my pleasure to present to you a preliminary look at the 2019-2020 fiscal year budget. To give you a rough idea of a timeline for this, we'll go over it tonight, and then we'll have a formal meeting at 6 p.m. on September 19th, 18th, for a final adoption. So this will give you a chance to look at it, and if you have questions, we can address some of those questions more at the next meeting. So to kind of talk a little bit about the timeline of how this whole budget process works, it all starts around in March. We get our finalized levy, so that kind of helps us understand what our revenues are going to be for the year. We have a pretty good idea what it is already, but getting the finalized levy is that guarantee. We have budget meetings with various department heads and principals, and after meeting with them and kind of going over some of the expenditures over the year, we look, as a business office, we look at past expenditures and any future needs, so trying to understand any implications of evidence-based funding, things like that. In May, we established a tentative budget, which was presented to you. In August, as we get more information in, we try to make adjustments as we go, and then finally in September, where we're at today, we go into adoption. So for some challenges for the budget for this year, I just want to highlight we did not find out about additional tier funding until August 5th. We were able to get that into the budget this year, but that obviously makes it hard when you're trying to project expenditures and plan for any adjustments in staffing or other curriculum purchases, however else we would be spending that money. It's hard to do that until you know how much money you have to spend. So we're still in the process as an administration of evaluating the different options that we have for spending those additional tier funding dollars. This year we also had an issue with large turnover. This prompted a lot more hirings, and it obviously is going to fluctuate the salary as we go, as we made those adjustments. And then finally, ongoing contract negotiations also make projections a challenge. For the process of how this works, so what we do is we review past trends in expenditures and revenue. We look at what's our corporate personal property replacement tax looking like, what's our grants look like, what are our tax levies look like from a revenue perspective to see is this something that we can kind of project going forward. We also look at expenditures and see is this an area where we've spent up to the budget and then some, in which case maybe we need to budget more in that area. And is there areas where we're not spending up to the budget, in which case is that an area of opportunity where we can make some cuts? We also look at any changes in grants, and we also look at any changes in enrollment to ensure proper staffing. Staffing challenges, building a budget while hiring is ongoing is a fun task. I highly recommend it. Also, it's a challenge to account for leaves, mid-year resignations, et cetera. So I know all the people who start the year, but if somebody takes leave part of the way through the year, that obviously has an effect on substitutes. It has an effect on their pay for sick leave. If they run out of sick leave, then they're not getting paid anymore for that. And mid-year resignations, obviously there's a time where the position's open and you're trying to find a replacement. So that'll adjust, obviously, the subs again, but will reduce salaries. So a little bit of a challenge trying to project that out. We're working to try to come up with what are some trends in that area so we can maybe make some better adjustments in our budget in future years. We also take time as an O&M department and with the superintendent and myself to review capital project needs of the district. We also look at the budget from different angles. You can look at an account by department, by grant, by object, by account number. And it'll sound weird, but each way you look at it a different way, it'll be like, oh, that makes sense. And then you look at it from a department perspective and be like, whoa, that throws the whole department out of whack. Or you'll look at it by a grant and say, hey, this looks really off. But then when you look, oh, they made a cut in a separate area in the grant. That's why this one's really high. So we just try to look at it as many different ways as possible to make sure that we're understanding every single aspect and every single account number. And then obviously for details, it's all broken down by funds based upon our school district laws. We have the education fund, which I'll talk more about in a second. Operations and maintenance, our debt service, our transportation, our retirement, our capital projects, our working cash, and our tort fund. To really highlight some of the big things as we go through that, education fund is where the vast majority of our expenditures are, followed closely by our operations and maintenance department. Debt service is all the mortgages that we took out to build all the wonderful buildings that we have. Transportation is pretty self-explanatory, as is retirement. Capital projects is reserved usually for any big projects that we had, such as our solar in the previous 2 years. Working cash works as almost a district savings account with a lot of restrictions on how money can be moved in and out of it. So you'll see there's not much for expenditures. And then finally our tort fund, which is basically a lot of our liability insurances. So to kind of put all that in perspective, from a fund perspective, as I said, 76.84% of our money comes in the education fund and is spent out of the education fund. Operations and maintenance is second highest at 7%. Debt service, just because we're Grays Lake, we have a higher debt service than most. And then the rest, as you can see, from transportation, our retirement account, and our lovely tort account is 0.23. You can't even see the slice. So put that all in perspective. So when you see things like, oh, it's a 5% raise in the tort fund, well, it's not really, we're not talking a lot of money. To look at it a different way, expenditures by object. So 61% of our expenditures are salaries and 13% are benefits. 12% is our services. This is going to be everything from our night custodial staff to some of our tuition payments. Most of the tuition, though, is going to be up in our tuition another area. We do have some capital good purchases, a very small amount of non-capitalized good purchases, and then obviously our supplies, the pens and pencils and paper. And to just kind of put that all in perspective, from a supplies, capital goods, and non-capitalized goods perspective, Supplies is anything that's under $500. Non-capitalized goods is anything from $500 to $2,000. So think a laptop for a teacher. And then our capital goods are going to be anything over $2,000. So that'll be larger furniture purchases, or if we had to purchase a new boiler, things like that. So some of the assumptions that I had for going into the budget year, we had the additional tier funding purchases, but I want to emphasize this is fiscal year 19 additional tier funding purchases. When we approved a budget last September, that was before we had adopted any of the decisions for hiring additional staff, such as our behavior interventionist, our 2 instructional coaches, our 2 techs, et cetera. So the budget, you'll see, is kind of trying to catch up to what we had decided to do midway through the year last year. We also had the curriculum purchases that was approved at the end of last year, as well as the one-to-one technology initiative. All of those had some significant and wonderful impacts on our budget. Cannot thank the state enough for the things that we're able to do because of that funding, and then the direction, obviously, you as a board gave us for making those purchases. Overall, we saw increased benefit costs. Our medical HMO was a decrease of 4.5%. However, our medical PPO and high deductible health plan increased at 7.9%. Fortunately, our dental stayed flat. Overall, that meant we had a slight increase in our benefits costs, just due to the larger PPO and high deductible health plan. Increased insurance costs were an issue as well. We had an increased workers' compensation insurance rate of 9.33%, as well as an increase in our property and casualty of 5.04%. Those rates are based upon, for workers' compensation, it's based upon our claims history. And our property and casualty, the big increase for that was due to our addition of the solar fields. We've also seen some increases in special education. CEDAL approved an increase of 4.67%, and we're projecting a tuition increase of almost 20% for this year. Transportation, as you're aware from May, was approved at a 6% increase, but the good news is we are showing a decrease in electricity of 22%, and that is still being that's us being very conservative still. I'm hoping to see that number. I'm hoping to see our electric bills be even lower. In terms of changes in revenue, we have the evidence-based tier funding, the $943,000 of additional tier funding. Again, really looking forward to seeing that money and seeing direction from an administration perspective and from a board perspective on how we can best utilize that money. Operating levy revenue increase of $742,000. That was an increase of 2.67%. The reason why that's higher than CPI is we just had a very large increase in our new properties. We're projecting to finally receive the SREC income, which is the solar renewable energy credits. Essentially, the ComEd or Ameren, which is one of the other companies, purchases the electricity from us and prepays us for that electricity over 5 years instead of over the 15 years. So it works out well for us to get that money up front, and also some inverter rebates. Finally, we have the increase in interest returns, which may or may not be premature depending upon how the market acts in the next few months, but there are some warning signs already. However, looking in years past at what we've projected for interest returns versus what we received, I felt we needed to increase that area to better reflect money that we've been receiving in that area. So to dive right in, we have the education fund. Again, this was about 71% of our total expenditures. You'll see the vast majority of our levy comes into this area. You'll see, even though the levy increased 2.67%, the levy in this area increased 2.93%. And the reason for that is we're trying to assign more money to the education fund and less money to some of the other funds to make up for, as you'll see in a minute, the deficit that we're experiencing. Other local revenue increased a little bit. The biggest driver of that is the new tech fee for Chromebooks, the $50 for grades 3 through 8. Evidence-based funding, that increases a straight $943,000 from the additional tier funding that we received. So last year we received $12.59 million, And then the way the system works, that becomes our new base, and then we receive additional tier funding based upon need. And then for this year, we received an additional $943,000. So that'll be, in fiscal year 21, that $13.5 million will be the new base, and whatever additional tier funding we receive then will then become the new additional tier funding. Other state, we have a large projected increase here. We've lost a little bit from some grants, but we did receive a wonderful pre-K grant this year that we're excited about. So that led us to have a large increase in our other state aid. The fortunate part for the pre-K grant is for 1 year we had lost the pre-K grant, and the district had to fund the pre-K program out of its fund reserves. So we're excited to have the pre-K grant back to help cover some of those costs. And then federal, you'll see it went up slightly. This is due to fluctuations in federal grant funding. So receiving some additional funding based upon EL and based upon low income, as well as, but seeing some decreases in other areas. But overall, an increase of 4.12%. For expenditures, we have salaries. I put an asterisk by this. These are potential raises. Obviously, this number will change depending upon whatever negotiations end up at. The number you'll see is a little bit higher. I, again, want to emphasize this is from the evidence-based funding increased staff, in addition to the raises for current staff. So this is, again, those 2 instructional coaches, the 2 techs, the behavior interventionist, et cetera. Benefits, this is another area that will adjust as we finalize a contract, since some of those benefits are obviously tied to salaries. For purchase services, I know this looks like a big jump, and it is, but the biggest reason for these jumps would be the increased software usage and for some of the grant adjustments that we've had to make based upon receiving grants from the federal government. With the one-to-one program, that again wasn't something that we had originally budgeted for or planned for, so that's why there's that large jump in this area. For supplies, again, you'll see it seems like a large jump, but this is tied entirely to Chromebooks and curriculum purchases that were approved in the spring of this past year, fiscal year. So again, this is where the budget is starting to catch up with some of the areas that we had approved after we had adopted the budget. Capital outlay, we're looking to try to save a little bit in that area. It's not raising at quite the same rate as CPI, but close, but we're trying to save where we can. Tuition and other. This area, we saw a large increase of 9.79%. This is due to our increased special ed outplaced tuition, not just the cost of the programs, but the number of students in the program as well. Looking at over the last several years, this has been an area that's grown considerably. And finally, we have non-capitalized goods. The big section for this one is there's been some furniture updates that we've had to do in light of things like at Woodview, where we had to remove a computer lab to put in a new classroom due to increasing enrollment at Woodview. Overall, we're projecting a deficit of $153,000 at the current time. I'm always scared whenever I see the word deficit and see a negative number. However, I also look at it from the perspective of our overall expenditures of $40 million. So $153,000 is cutting it pretty close. That number can fluctuate as we go through the year, as I said, especially as it ties to salaries as people come and go or take leaves. So I'll always be nervous about a deficit, but I'm not too nervous. Yes?
Is the fiscal year 19 column, is that the fiscal year 19 budget, or is it the actual?
It's the budget.
Thanks.
In the operations and maintenance fund, you'll see again, even though the levy increased 2.67%, the levy in this area increased 6%. The large reason for that, again, is we have a lot of capital projects coming down the pipeline. So we're trying to adjust for that to make sure we have the funds necessary to cover all of those large expenses. Other local, I love seeing revenue increase by 400%. I wish others would increase by 400%, but alas, it cannot be. But But for other local, the big thing for this is the solar rebates, our SREC income, our inverter rebates, things like that.
John, how much of that is a one-time and how much of that will be recurring?
So roughly 600,000 is a one-time, and I'd say probably 400,000 a year for the next 5 years is the rest of it. In this area, we have our salary increases. Again, these are potential raises, as well as, in our case, we have increased overtime, looking at our overtime usage in the last year due to a rough winter that we had, as well as, depending upon how much stock you put in a farmer's almanac, we're supposed to have another rough winter this year. But overall, we're trying to adjust our overtime to correlate with what our actual expenditures are. Same thing with benefits. This will be another one that will probably have to be adjusted as we finalize a contract. Purchase services is increasing. This is the two big driving factors of this is going to be the night custodial contract. So our day custodians are currently staff members, but our night custodial we contract out to RJB Properties. The other thing is looking at, this is that piece where you go back and look over the last several years and say, what have we been spending versus what have we been budgeting, and realizing, oh, we've been increasing our water usage over the last several years. So adjusting our budget to account for some of the water usage that we've been using. Supplies, you'll see that we're projecting that to go down to 14%. The biggest driving factor, again, for that is our solar panels and the electricity that that's generating for us. And are not needing to use electricity for some months. It's been exciting to see some months with negative numbers in terms of usage, since we're pushing more out to the system than getting back. Capital outlay, for right now, we have this budgeted into our operations and maintenance fund. We might need to adjust the budget later and put this into the capital projects fund, but for now we have it in our operations and maintenance fund. And the big driving factor for this one is just our Meadowview roof. For a partial of the Meadowview roof. Part of the expenditures obviously will happen in fiscal year 20, and then the rest of the expenditures would happen as it's a summer project in the following fiscal year. So we have a large portion of our capital projects is dedicated to the Meadowview roof.
So you're saying over the summer next year, we'll look at
Tentatively, that's what we're looking into. Just as a history on that, we had talked about doing it this past summer, but the decision was made to take some more time to analyze the solar and how it worked at Fredericks, and especially at Park and GMS, since those were roof mounts, and look at possibly doing roof-mounted solar at Meadowview as well. We right now have plans to meet with Performance Services in October to start some of those preliminary discussions. Miscellaneous fees. Just want to highlight again that we've structured our debt for the solar fields so that as soon as we got the money in, we would be able to put it right back onto the principal of the payment. So that way we're not paying as much in interest over the life of the debt certificates that we borrowed to pay for the solar fields. So as excited as I am to get a whole bunch of money in, it immediately goes right back out. And then non-capitalized goods, we're projecting to just hold the line in that area. Overall, in this fund, we're projecting a deficit of $750,000. I'm not nervous about this. It's entirely related to the Meadowview roof and the capital projects that we have coming down the pipeline. This is why we've been saving money in the fund balance over these last several years. Now those capital projects are happening, so we're finally spending that money that we've been saving down. Debt service fund is really straightforward. We levy for as much as we need to make our debt service payments. The only thing exciting about this one, although the numbers don't reflect it, is we actually paid off one of our bonds this last fiscal year. However, the way we restructured the bonds was in the best interest of our taxpayers. So when one bond gets paid off, it immediately, the amount that we were spending on that goes towards the next bond. So we have a snowball effect to try to pay off our bonds quickly, and that way we don't have years where, I believe in the past it was set up to have a $10 million debt service in one year and a $5 or $6 million the next, which would cause pretty wild fluctuations in people's property tax bills. So we're excited that it's been restructured with that forward thinking in mind of a normalized property tax bill as well as snowballing our debt. In the transportation fund, this is where the adjustments in the levy are starting to catch up to us. So we've reduced the levy 2 years ago. Fiscal year 18, we reduced our levy. And just due to the lag time in the levy, this is when it's finally starting to hit the budget. So we'll see a small decrease in our levy for the transportation fund. Again, that money is being shifted to places like our operations and maintenance fund for capital projects, as well as to our education fund to try to cover some of our educational expenses. Other local, we're seeing a small increase, just as we have increased costs for running some of our facilities, we're increasing some of our fees in terms of anything from pay to ride or other areas. For other state, the great part about this, I know it looks bad to have negative or to see a reduction in our revenue. The reason why we're predicting to receive less revenue from other state aid is this is where our transportation claim comes into effect. And last year, thanks to our transportation coordinator, we were able to reduce some of the routes that we had. And by reducing some of the routes, we obviously don't get reimbursed as much. So the reduction is purely tied to we're not spending as much, so we're not going to receive as much in return. Lastly, the federal one, again, it's scary to see a negative 39%, but in a budget of $3 million, we're talking $8,000, so it's not a big swing. But this is entirely due to grant allocations. A lot of our federal grants are usually assigned in the transportation fund are assigned for our summer school programming. In terms of salaries, again, we're talking $27,000, but the big reduction here is we went from having a full-time transportation coordinator to that role being picked back up again by Bambi Johnston. She's been helping us as we've been reevaluating our transportation department, so she took back over that role. So without a full-time FTE, we actually decreased our FTE in the transportation department, which obviously caused us to have some great savings, thankfully, but we'll be reevaluating that as we go through the year. That obviously is also tied to the benefits as well. Purchase services, again, even though we have a 6% increase in Durham, because of those fewer routes and fewer usage for some of the other field trips and things like that, we're projecting a small decrease in the expenses in this area. That might need to change depending upon how the rest of the year goes. We've already had a couple of routes that have been brought to our attention that are hitting the higher end of our internal guides for transportation. We normally have a guide of about 45 minutes for students to be on a bus, and we've become aware as the school year started that some of those routes are going to be longer than 45 minutes, so we're trying to make some adjustments, and we might have to re-add routes to get back under that 45-minute threshold. Finally, we have supplies, and in this area, the biggest decrease is just due to decreased fuel consumption due to the fewer routes. So overall, we're projecting a surplus of $25,000. This is our retirement fund, our 50 fund. This is entirely related to things like Medicare, Social Security, IMRF, things like that. So we have our levy. Again, this was an area where we reduced our levy to try to take advantage of some of the fund balance that we have in here and adjust that money into other departments, other funds of need, such as operations and maintenance and education. Other local, again, it looks great to have an 81% increase, but it's really $4,500. And this is that increased in interest that we've been seeing. Medicare, IMRF, CDL IMRF, and while the CDL IMRF will stay the same, but the Medicare, IMRF, and Social Security are tied to wages, so these are also areas that might need to see adjustments as we finalize the contract. And last, my favorite fund, the tort fund. This is another area where we have tried to take some of the funds from the levy for this and redirect it into other funds. Also looking at some of the interest that we've received in this fund, just adjusted our interest for the other local revenue. And the purchase services, that 5.25% increase is that increase in property and casualty insurance. Overall, we're projecting a deficit. That's by design. We're trying, as I said, we're trying to use some of the fund balance in here and reduce our levy temporarily to put some of that funds towards other funds in need. So overall, to just talk about our operating funds, this kind of removes some of the things like our debt service fund or our working cash fund, or funds that don't see a lot of action or don't have a large impact on what we can approve. This is our operating fund. So this will be our education fund, our operations and maintenance fund, transportation, and our retirement fund for the most part. And here you'll see the levy again. It's about that 2.6769%. Other local, the large increase is thanks to the solar rebates and credits that we have projected coming in. The evidence-based funding we talked about in the ed fund. Other state, we're seeing a general increase. And federal, we're seeing a general increase as well. The salaries, we've talked about for evidence-based funding, additional salaries as well as benefits, all tied to our contract negotiations, purchase services, curriculum and Chromebook purchases for our supplies. The capital outlay is the large increase, and that's again just due to our capital project of the Meadowview roof that we're looking at doing this coming up summer. Tuition other, the large increase here is special education tuition, but even more so that solar debt payment. So again, as the money comes in, we're paying off principal right away. And then finally, our non-capitalized goods. This is those furniture purchases we talked about in the ed fund. So overall, we're projecting a deficit of $928,000 in our operating funds. But once you take out our capital projects and other things that we have been planning for, we're projecting a deficit of $178,000. Any questions?
Along the first slide, you kind of laid out all the different changes. Do you have the dollar amounts that are tied to those roughly? And you can just give them to us when you get a chance. Like, you have Medicare HMO decrease of 4.5%. What's that dollar amount? What's the decrease in the 22% of electricity? Percentages are good, but like you said, 5% on $100,000 is very little when you look at the overall. What's the dollar amounts tied to those percentage increases or decreases? Or if you could share that with the board when you get a chance, that would be, I think, helpful information.
I'd be happy to. Any other questions?
John, I know we've talked about the CDL tuition thing in the past, but could you give me a refresher on what's driving those increases in tuition?
Specifically for CDL or special education tuition in general?
In general, whatever you think is relevant, just to understand what that spike is about.
Heather might be the person to talk about that. You want me on mic?
Sure.
I know you've told us before.
No, it's complex. Dr. Mike, you know too. So fill in where I'm wrong. So essentially, CDL's structure for grant money has completely shifted. The federal government decided that no longer will we flow through dollars through our cooperatives to the districts that are members of the cooperative. So now we've had to restructure how we will get money back into CDL. And so they've had to look at different things like our operating costs, tuition, and things like that. So all the money that we get through our grant funds will now come to the district, and we have to now get it back in there for
Versus the other
their
way
stuff.
around.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's part of it, but they're also facing the same kind of financial increases with the economy, would you say is accurate? So you're seeing those adjustments as well. So they have to account for, those kind of things and their cost of revenues or compared to their expenditures with staffing costs and things like that. Is that fair? Okay.
Yeah, so this came up in negotiations a little bit, but when we looked at CDL's average teacher salaries compared to some of the neighbors, they were considerably lower. So I know one driving factor for CDL is their staffing costs and the need to be competitive. So, yes.
I know you mentioned that the negotiations are ongoing, but what assumptions did you bake into the fiscal year 20 budget on that line, the salaries line?
I baked in our last the board's last proposal, which is the last proposal that's on the table currently. So once we have an updated proposal, I believe it's the union's turn for a proposal in the next negotiations. I'll obviously adjust as we go.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm good.
All right. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks,
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
Okay, next are board reports. Okay.
So I mentioned before that the village, met with the village rep to talk about the Greenest Region Compact. And we talked about ways we could collaborate, and one of them was simple. They're trying to get 175 households to express interest in a food composting program. So I asked if we could have just the sign-up sheets made available at all 7 schools, and I have them here if you guys would like to sign up. So just kind of an olive branch to the village. And then also I'm trying to learn more about collective bargaining, and there's a webinar, I think that's new, through ISB, and it talks about a process called interest-based negotiation. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I thought it was interesting to look at, and I have the subscription for however long, for a few weeks now, and it's just a few minutes, but if anyone wants to see it, I'm happy to share.
I do, just quick. Last week I had, is this on? Last week I had the August governing board meeting for CEDAL. So the update that the superintendent would like me to share, the largest issue at the moment going on over at CEDAL is staffing issues throughout all the schools, but in particular at the Gages Lake School, which is the school that services students and kids with significant behavioral issues. So at the governing board meeting, which is the large meeting with all of the representatives for each of the member school districts, there was a significant public comment session that lasted close to 2 hours. And it resulted now in the creation of a task force from the superintendent and the different stakeholders in the district in CEDAL to address those staffing issues. And so she asked me to share, as part of my seat on that board, that they're moving forward with the task force to address those staffing issues, and there's evidence that those staff openings are being filled, and that it is addressing staff morale in that school as well as across CEDAL. So we have an executive board meeting coming up in a couple of weeks. At this point, we'll get another update, and I hope to attend one of the task force sessions over the next couple of weeks as well in the evening to get a sense of how that is moving forward. But that was the largest challenge that they're facing right now, but they are ensuring that the students are still getting the services that they need and trying to fill some of those significant gaps. And that's what I can share now in the open session. So, thank you.
Anyone else?
One more thing.
Sure.
I went to go see the Woodview's classroom garden. Abby Petrosinski gave me a tour. It is so neat. If you haven't seen it, highly recommend it. But she talked about the connection between the gardens and curriculum. It was fun to see how excited she was, and it's a huge expanse of gardens. So I hadn't been there before. It was neat.
Okay. Up to you.
Sure. Well, speaking of CEDAL, I'm glad you mentioned that. I will be attending kind of a CEDAL listening session tomorrow. So Veldon has invited surrounding school district superintendents for them. So I'm looking forward to that. We have a lot of things to talk about, and we'll just kind of do them chronologically. So we're going to start actually with Paul Lewis talking about Institute Days.
So that is one of the most, in your chronological order, that was one of the big things that happened, our 3-day Institute Days before school started. Many of you were able to join us for some of that. We had sessions about diversity and equity. We also had some sessions about assessment literacy, along with welcomes from all the different groups the different unions and from your group, from the board's perspective as well. We also had PSRP training specific to behavior with our new behavior specialist. That was well received. I did a little bit of training with the PSRPs. Along those first 2 days, we had job-alike time, so that meant the teachers working on their content areas together. And we also had presentations about our new K-5 math program. So we had 3 trainers come in to do grade-specific training, K1, 2, and then 3, 4, 5, and so that was very well received. We also had a little bit of refocus training for the 6, 8 Carnegie math. We also had training for our new handwriting program that you approved for K2, and that was well received. We did find out that morning that the 3, 4 handwriting trainer was stuck in Columbus, Ohio, and no flights coming out. So we're actually in the middle of they're being very gracious and providing even more opportunities coming forward because they missed our Institute Day. So they're meeting our needs on our time, on when we can make it work, instead of us having to have subs or any of those things. So I'm actually happy that they're being very, very supportive of all of that. And the last of the 3 days was the building day. And so the principals had activities and learning and sharing to figure out their new staff and to get to know each other as a staff. Also opening days activities to get ready for students. So it was a very, very, very busy 3 days along for our opening institutes. We've just closed our survey. So we had surveys for our PSRP and our certified staff. So at our next leadership meeting, we'll be going over all of those things. There's some very good positive feedback, also some suggestions for us to think about, and I think that's what is good when we have survey data, to continue doing what's working and then see if there's areas to improve. So those will be things that we'll be going deep into with the survey results.
Thanks, Paul. And then school started, so we'll talk about that for a moment. Our central office administration was able to be available throughout the district. We were all at the various schools. I'm really happy to say I was able to get to all of the schools during the first couple of days and saw an unbelievably positive first start of school. The sun was shining. I mean, that sun came out for us, and it was a great couple of days. And of course, ongoing really positive experiences in our schools. It was really wonderful to see our students greeting their old friends and meeting new friends and kind of making their place in their classrooms, and of course really excitedly greeting their teachers. So that was a lot of fun. And speaking of the start of school, every year we have to report our 6th day enrollment to the state. So I wanted to talk with you about that for a little bit. This year, our enrollment on the 6th day of school without pre-K, we typically don't look at it with pre-K because there's so much variability in our pre-K count. So without pre-K, we were at 3,542 students. That is a change from last year. Last year was 3,565 students, so 23 students fewer this year than last year. Not a significant change at all. One thing to note is that we do have 53 students more than we predicted last spring when we were doing our staffing. Most of our schools have kind of a pretty flat enrollment, but that change of those additional 53 students, most of them came from Meadowview and Prairie View, where we have about 20 students, extra, that doesn't sound nice, additional 20 students in each of those schools. I have been in contact with the principals of both of those schools. The students are very nicely spread out amongst grade levels. At this time, we are not looking at the need for any staffing changes at either of those schools. So, nonetheless, we still do have some open positions, not new positions, but still open positions. So I'm going to pass this over to Chris to talk about that. Well, just come over to a mic, however you wish.
Just a few things about some of our open positions. We have a .6 physical education position still open, split between Avon and Woodview. That position is currently being staffed by subs at both buildings. Both principals are continuing to look for physical education teachers. We've reached out to some of our new physical education teachers to see if they have friends from college. We've also reached out to some universities. And if you know anybody, we have a .6 position. We still are short a health clerk at Park Campus. It was right after central registration that the health clerk left us. Currently, it's being filled by a contractual nurse, and they are diligently working on trying to find a health clerk with some medical background due to the significant needs of the building. Just a few minutes ago, you approved our SIS, our SIS specialist through the consent agenda, so that position is filled. We are happy to say.
We haven't done that yet.
Not yet,
No,
but we're hoping that
in a
they
few
will
minutes.
shortly.
You approved the addendum.
Uh-huh.
So in a few minutes, we hope that you approve that. So, and then we still have 9 paraprofessional positions open across the district in a variety of buildings. Hopefully by the end of the week, 2 of those will be filled. I'm meeting with 2 staff members, 2 potential staff members by the end of the week. Principals worked very hard to get all these positions filled right before school started. But once school starts, we have to wait for the dust to settle, get the kids all settled in, all the teachers settled in. So now everybody's back looking to fill 1 or 2 positions, paraprofessionals, or those teaching positions that we have left open. So that's where we stand for our staffing.
Thanks.
Any questions?
Okay, thank you. And actually, just hand the mic over to Stephanie. She's going to talk with us about the first BPAC, Bilingual Parent Advisory Council meeting that we had last Friday.
Yep. So we had our first of 6 BPAC meetings, and it was at Avon, and we packed the multipurpose room. Over 200 people came. It was donuts for the department, which is exactly what it sounds. So we had 14 dozen donuts, and about 15 staff members came, and they introduced themselves and what school and what they teach. And then we had an open question and answer with the parents, and basically we went table to table, and anything that we needed to share with the whole group, because it was multiple question, we did do that. This is our shortest event. It was just an hour. Our next one is the 27th of September, and this is about, students will be giving presentations about famous artists and painters around the world, and then as centers, and so the parents and their children can make a craft based on the style of the painter or artist.
Does the participation from the community seem to be growing? The word getting out and it's growing?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Thank you. All right, and you can see I don't really want to talk this week. I'm handing it back over to Paul to talk with us about the IAR results that we've recently received, and also some news about an exciting opportunity for our board.
So one of the things that you have been asking us about is about the timeliness of state assessment results. And so we just, in a little over a week ago, had access to a good amount of the IAR, Illinois Assessment of Readiness assessment results. So just as Chris said, when the dust settles here a little bit, then I'm going to be diving into all of those results to create a presentation for you. We've also agreed with the ROE and coaches there. They're going to help us do some analysis of the data from an outside perspective instead of just an internal view of it. So I'm excited to see what they have to say about our data from what they've learned from other school districts as well. So I think that's a good thing for us to consider, to have other people look at our data, so that we'll be coming back to share that information with you. And then the exciting news is that in the spring, a group of us, Mrs. Krell, our former superintendent, and Dr. Mack and Christy, Braden, and myself, we were considering putting in a proposal for the National School Board Association Conference that's going to be hosted in Chicago in April. And we put in a presentation proposal called Sharing Our Story, A District's Journey to Equity. And I found out just this past week that our proposal was accepted. And so we will be able to present at the National School Board Association on our journey, because we do see it as a journey, that we're not there yet, but we're on the road and we're working hard about it. So just a pretty exciting thing that all school boards from across the nation will be coming to Chicago and we'll get to show off a local school district. So I'm very proud and thankful for the opportunity. So I don't know if either one of you wanted to say something about it, but it's just exciting.
It's great. It's really exciting. I'm looking forward to presenting it. Yep. Congratulations. Yep. Very cool.
Looking forward to cheering you on.
All right, and moving way into the future, actually May 5th, I did want to share with you that for the 5th year in a row, the GMS Jazz Ensemble has been invited to perform at the Chicago Jazz Showcase. And again, that's not all the way until May, but we just found out, so we wanted to share that with you now. Many jazz legends have played on that stage. Dizzy Gillespie played there, Herbie Hancock, Miles Davis, Charlie Parker. This is pretty cool. And our school is the only middle school band that's ever been invited to play on that stage. So I'm sure you'll hear about it as we get closer, and I'm sure you'll hear about it afterwards, but we want to let you know. And last but not least, just upcoming this weekend, a reminder that we have the GMS 50th anniversary, an event on Sunday, kind of running alongside the Lions Club Steer Roast. Leslie, wave Leslie. Yeah, she's been working so hard on making some wonderful videos. She's been interviewing people. Sue, wave Sue. Sue has been working really hard on putting some things together as well. And of course, the administrators at the school are working on this. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And that's it for the superintendent and the rest of the cabinet report.
So are we gonna need to start putting a microphone over there?
Yeah, sure. Let's get these people talking.
There we go. You guys are all in trouble now. Okay, thank you. Next is the committee reports.
There are no committee.
Okay. We were gonna talk about. You have that on
Those
the
are
list?
actually, that's actually
That's
on
down
new
the- okay.
business.
Fine. I should probably pay attention.
Excellent.
Okay, no committee reports, so we'll go to the consent agenda. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
Any questions inside there? Okay.
Braden. Aye. Mackey.
Aye.
LaCroy.
Aye.
Strack.
Aye.
Miller.
Aye.
Mack.
Aye.
Weedman.
Aye. Okay, action items is a motion to approve the IRMF audit resolution 6.72. John,
Second.
you want to explain, John?
So just as a refresher, IMRF Resolution 6.72 is related to the reportable pensions, reportable salaries, assigned to Section 125 IRS requirements. This is the flexible spending account contributions or health savings account contributions that staff members make. Traditionally, that money is not reported to IMRF, but this resolution would authorize us to continue reporting that as a pensionable benefit effective as of 2011, so when IMRF first made the change.
Weedman.
Aye.
Miller.
Aye.
Mack.
Aye.
Mackey.
Aye.
Braden. Aye. LaCroy.
Aye.
Strack.
Aye.
And the next is unfinished business. And we have update on the cost of an assessment to provide hot breakfast in all schools.
So just really briefly, in our conversations with Wold Architects, they directed us to Stewart Design Associates to provide us a quote on what we would need as a district from a facilities standpoint to serve hot breakfasts. The quote number we received was $4,200 plus $180 per hour for anything outside of that scope. So at this point, we would be looking for the board, for direction from the board, whether you'd like us to proceed with contracting with Stewart to start a facilities assessment. Again, just want to emphasize this is just a facilities assessment. It doesn't get into some of the other costs that would be associated with it, such as staffing or food, et cetera.
what would it take to get, I mean, they wouldn't do that part of it, but would there be a cost associated with us investigating those costs as well, the staffing and the food and everything else? I mean, just so we have a picture of the whole thing, rather than just the facilities, an understanding of what staffing would be required and everything else.
Not to put Arbor on the spot publicly, but I would assume something like that, they would be excited to have additional business, so I would hope that it would not have additional costs for it, but at this point I wouldn't know what that if there would be a cost or what that cost would be. We had originally been hoping that Stewart Design Associates would have been able to give us advice on some of these other areas as well, but we were told that they limit themselves to just the facilities portion instead of the overarching food service analysis.
Is it a realistic proposition, if we spend the $4,200 for this analysis, I mean, is it a realistic proposition that we'd be able to provide hot breakfast in the end? So is it worth spending that? I mean, it's not a lot of money, obviously, but.
Yeah, because we had to consider all the upgraded costs to the buildings and transportation and food to get there, and then cost of the staff to take care of that as well, or the contract to take care of that as well. It's a bigger project than just the $4,200.
If there's no chance
Exactly.
of it even happening, then maybe we've done your thought.
Well, I mean, it's if it's what we choose to do,
Well, yeah.
we can
Right.
do it, but there would be a significant cost to it.
I think this is a great example of something that you should consult our board priorities for. And so maybe moving to spend money in this area before we have those, to understand, what are our priorities and does this fall on that list, is probably the bigger conversation, I would think, before we go down the road.
So do we want to just table this for now?
That's
until-
what I'm thinking, we table it until we make our priority list, and then if this is on the priority list, that makes sense, but if it's not, it's not gonna happen in the next 3 years, because we're gonna attend to our priorities, right? So.
I just wanted to comment that choosing not to pursue this doesn't mean that we can't continue to pursue how to offer as healthy as possible choices to our students during breakfast. So, when that conversation left off, there was ongoing conversation about, hey, can we bring kids in for a focus group? Are there things that we can do to continue upping the nutritional content for our students? And we can still keep working on that without pursuing hot breakfast right now.
Do we have some sort of agenda for October? Isn't that when we're going to start talking about priorities?
You're talking about
Our
the
workshop.
board workshop? Actually, I have a telephone meeting scheduled with Dee, who will be doing that with us, and we'll start working on that. But that meeting isn't
It's too
necessarily it's not really where we start working on those agendas or those priorities. That's more about agreements that we all have together as to how we work. Yeah.
Okay.
So we want to table it?
I think so.
But is Arbor going to give us some sort of nutritional assessment with the addition of the cheese sticks, and they were going to start tracking?
So
All of
that's what I
that.
mean. There are
Yeah.
things that we'll keep working with them and be
Okay.
able to come back to you with information. So not moving forward with this doesn't mean that the conversation about how
It's
we
done.
increase the nutritional content for our students ends.
Okay. We actually need a motion to table that, or just table it? Okay, perfect. Sounds good to me. Okay, on the new business.
Okay, so am I set up, Joe, now? Am I?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I shared information with all of you electronically about this a little bit as well. I wanted to share an interest with you regarding updating how we are providing information about our policies online. So if you were to pull up our policies currently on from our website, you would see a PDF. And so a PDF is a little bit clunky and difficult to use. If somebody is looking for a policy, they have to scroll through the entire PDF to find it. And it also becomes incumbent upon the school district to keep it updated. The reason I had Joe plugging me in over here, is that I wanted to show you another option. So I wanted to show you a sample of how many other school districts are doing this, and so I chose, oh, hello. Oh, the auto keystone corrected in case anyone's curious.
That's right, I got your mouse over here, I
That's-
play around. It's not doing what I want. Yeah. I get the joke out either way.
There we go. All right, so I decided just to choose our neighbors, Grays Lake District 127, to show you a sample of this system. But again, you will find this on many, many local school districts. So if I were to go to their school board policies, I'm just going to click here, and instead of a PDF, what they have is actually what Sue looks at on the back end anytime she is updating our policies. So if you were to want to see, for example, a policy related to instruction, you would just click on this section, and there is the entire list of their policies. We want to look at their policy about curriculum content, and there it is. And if they were to choose to update that policy, it would automatically, or through the system, update. No PDFs, and really, really easy for our community to use, our board to use, and frankly, our administrators to use. I will share with you that very often when I talk with people about policies throughout the district, I'm finding kind of that people are not as familiar with them as they might otherwise be, and I think that this would make an enormous difference for us. I know I've had experiences in the past, not here yet, but where I've talked with parents about something, and I've said, hey, let me pull you to that policy, and I've been on the phone with someone and said, okay, I'm going to walk you through where to find that on our website and get them there, and then we can talk about what's happening because we're both looking at the same thing. It's really, really hard to do with PDF. So we're bringing this to you because there is a cost to it. I'm not sure that it's necessarily a cost that has to be approved by the board, but we would be using the board budget, so we thought it would be respectful to talk with you about it first. We will be doing this through Press Plus, and you may know we're already using Press Plus, but this is kind of an add-on. It's at a cost of $2,500 a year. I think that it would be $2,500 really well spent because it is a wonderful communication tool.
Mhm.
So, questions about this?
I definitely support it. It's good for the community as far as access to the policies and good for us as well. So makes life easier for administration of the policies and everything else.
I think it's aligned with our transparency goals, so it seems worthwhile.
And I think we'll be able to do it pretty quickly. And you've already been in contact with them. Okay. So shall we move forward?
Yep.
Fantastic, thank you. Here. Sorry. And then speaking of.
Pushing.
You were gonna.
Okay, so I've had conversations kind of, with people individually about our board committees. It made sense to me for us to talk together about what board committees we have. There, I think, are a few that some folks have interest in adding, and it made sense to go over them. So we currently have a policy committee. It made sense to make sure we knew exactly who was going to be on that committee, and also we need to schedule a first meeting of that committee. So that's why that one's on there. We have a curriculum committee, although it's come through different names, I think, over the years. Wanted to ensure that we want to continue with that, and if so, who's going to be on it and what it's going to be called. John has talked about a finance committee. We don't currently have one, and so I will in a moment give you the floor just to talk about why we might have one and for the board to consider whether or not it's something we want to do, and if so, who would be on it. And finally, there's been conversation about a community engagement committee and kind of what the purpose of that committee would be and if we're moving forward with that. So that's kind of a framework for the conversation. Sound okay? All right. So I don't think there's a question about whether we're moving forward with the policy committee. And I wanted to make sure we knew exactly who's on it. So that's Jim and Jason.
I have been in the past, but I think I might want to shift if we're going to have a finance committee.
So plus open space to continue. So okay. All right. So we'll keep going. So maybe we won't decide when that first meeting is going to be until we know who the third member will be. Okay. Curriculum committee. That seems like a conversation to have if we're having one, and if so, what the purpose would be.
So the Kathleen Parkinson and Tom Meskel were on that committee both, and they were attending meetings, and I think one was the yin to the yang of the other one. There was a lot of push and pull between those two on that committee as far as how they would interact with staff. I think I'm saying that politically correctly. So I think we need to define what the role of the board member is going to be on that curriculum committee. Is it going to be for the purposes of, I see it as just as the purpose of sitting in on those meetings, seeing where the curriculum is going, and reporting back to the board, not getting down into the weeds as far as choosing which curriculum, and getting that involved. That's typically not, that's administration's job, is to do that type of stuff. But to hear back on what is the changes and going on.
Another thing that I witnessed in the short time I was on there, and they met at a time that was hard for me to get to many of them, but a lot of the discussion was around assessment as well, right? And there was, from the board perspective, there was analysis and interpretation and prescription that was happening that probably shouldn't be happening, but rather reporting back to what's going on from the curriculum point of view and how that might tie into the assessment and the results of the assessment.
I think also as a storyteller for the community, it's helpful to know what's going on with curriculum. Again, not as an advisory person, but just as someone who can say, here's where the district is headed, and this is, this is how money's being spent, this is how we're moving.
The committee should be the receivers of information about from the staff about what they would like to do as far as curriculum goes and assessment and everything else. And then we, as a board, evaluate that information and provide direction as to what we're willing to support. I mean, like you said, we're not supposed to get down in the weeds with the day-to-day operation of curriculum, so.
Paul, you were on that most of them, so your thoughts?
I don't think it's ever a bad idea for us to share what we're working on because we're always working on the next things. To be perfectly honest, it was difficult at times because I would get pulled in multiple different directions and not necessarily on the things we were maybe working on. And so then it was stop that, prepare something for the committee because of a request. So that was often very time consuming or maybe frustrating at times. And then sometimes we didn't have everyone attend, so then we would prepare everything and then we wouldn't have attendees, and so that was also, I'm being honest.
No,
I'm very glad to share. We have some ideas of things that we're interested in. We have, I'd love to do some preview of the IAR. That was one of the things that Dr. Glickenman and I just talked about. Is that just today or yesterday? to talk about, here's the things that we're learning and what other information would the board maybe value or appreciate, to kind of do a run through with some of those kind of things. But to know what we're coming with, so when we come with maybe a proposal for some new curriculum, it's not the first time that it come out of the blue, that that it's something we've been working on and how our teams work to get to those. So I'm very happy about that. Right now, you do know that we have one member down on our team, and so it's also a little bit challenging, but we'll be glad to support it in any way.
And that's how it should work, is you have a proposal, you bring it to the committee evaluates it, and then provides direction, and then have back and forth until it's ready for the board to vote on or approve or whatever, and that's exactly how it should work.
So do we agree on that concept for that board, for that committee?
Absolutely.
We even struggled with the name. Lynn keeps asking me, are you the curriculum department? Are you the teaching and learning department? And so yes, we are all of those things. My title has teaching and learning in it, but Amanda, my wonderful colleague, has curriculum in her title, and so we're kind of all over the board with all of those things.
Yeah, I just don't want to be down in the weeds and the stuff that we really shouldn't be into. It's your job.
But would we get high-level, like, assessments of effectiveness if we did implement curriculum, or if we're tracking certain decisions, at least, not necessarily picking, from a board member specifying what, but just getting output, if we've implemented curriculum 2 years ago, right, how's it going? Just at least getting a high-level effectiveness, and then to gauge, do we need to change track, or do we need to update something or modify? I think that level of analysis would be appropriate.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, if the committee could set criteria to evaluate it 2 years later, and but that's something the committee should do. And yeah, that's a good idea.
Did that committee exist as a natural outreach of the work you and the staff needed to do, or did the board ask for this committee? It was a board committee, right? Not a super.
I think it started shortly after I arrived, but it was also board request, because there was some interest to get more information about what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
We also were in the process of making some significant changes in curriculum world, and resources, and those things that we've done over the last 4 years have been significant. So it was okay to share some of those big things that we were working on.
Yeah, so I don't have an extensive institutional knowledge about how that came about, but I was wondering, do we still need it? Because I feel like you're very communicative about things that are going on in the curriculum world. You come with every assessment that's been done with the results, and you interpret it for us and say, here's the things you're picking up on.
Thank you for that.
I would expect that. I think we had a question about a year ago about the level of civics literacy, what was in the curriculum that addressed that. We have a question, you answer it. Is this assessment committee, curriculum committee even necessary anymore? That's the question I would want to know.
I have to admit that I wonder that as well, only because the work of our school district is completely about teaching and learning. So it would seem to me that in general, our board members would be interested in knowing what we're teaching, how the students are learning. And as you said, Jason, Paul does such a wonderful job of bringing information to you already. And so unless you need specific feedback from the board as we're trying to make decisions, I can just see the value in you doing board reports now and again and not having a committee.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, would agree.
Do we want to just make it a standing agenda item? So if there are updates or Q&A, it's just there. And if there isn't, then...
Paul, you just got to report every 2 weeks.
Or well, maybe one meeting a month. Make it like make it one meeting a month.
It could be every other. It could be one.
Yeah, like the first meeting of the month, every month or something.
Yeah.
It's very doable.
Is that
preferable.
Yeah, is that the frequency you think it should be? If it's something like that, is that too often, or is that?
And we can change it as you go. You could try something out.
I could see that some months might be a little bit weak in content, but other months will be very busy. And
Or it could also be just, our cabinet is working together to make sure that we have a common understanding of what kind of reports we're bringing to the board. So it could just be that whenever Paul has something to present, we just make sure he gets a presentation at the beginning of the board meeting.
I don't think there's a high risk that this is something that's going to fall off of the radar,
Right.
right, without a standing
Yeah.
agenda item.
We're going to keep teaching them.
To me, the goal is to make the work of the administration more effective and more efficient and not less. And so if a committee doesn't make it more effective and efficient, then I'm not sure why we.
And I think, I appreciate all that. The difficulty too is that the curriculum committee had a number of principals. It had Dr. Diaz on it. It had Ms. Lorenzo. And so it was a lot of hours of our work time. But it was also during school hours. And so then that's also very hard for some board members to make that work. And if it's not during school hours, then it impacts multiple of us as well. And so, but we're willing to do that, but it just does add up over time.
If it doesn't pay off, then.
Right, so why don't we eliminate the curriculum committee, and if we need to bring it back at some point, we can always bring it back at some point.
Probably made sense when there was a lot of changes going on.
Yeah.
It might not make sense now.
Okay.
Scratch that one.
All right. So, John, can you talk with us about any reasons that you might have for why a finance committee could be useful?
Just in speaking with several other CSBOs in the area and their experiences either with facilities committees where they talk about operations and maintenance and food service and finance, or just a specific finance committee, I had mixed reviews, to be honest. Some found them very helpful to help board members get a more detailed look at and understanding of all of the mechanics of what's going on in the finances in the district, which then obviously better prepares the board as a whole in those conversations out in the community. And some, so overall there was a lot of positives. There were a couple of concerns for some that they felt that it would be, some of the topics were better addressed just at a board meeting instead of as a separate committee meeting. So for the ones who had those recommendations, they said just increase the amount of reporting that you do at board meetings, and that should assist. So I largely want to leave this up to the board in general. If this is something that they would like to see a committee to get more in-depth information on and try out, then I'm obviously more than willing to start organizing that and putting together agendas and seeing if this is something that would be a good use for the board members' time. And then if it was something where after several sessions, it's like, this is something that is better addressed as a board and a board presentation in front of the whole, then we can kind of go from there. But I saw some mixed reviews on that.
So a little history, since we've been on the board, we did have a finance committee, and so when Stephen and I first got on the board, obviously the school district was in a lot of turmoil financially, personnel-wise, everything. So the community was really on us about looking at our budget and looking at cuts and everything else that went along with it. So we invited members of the community, even the business community, who were the ones really on us about it, trying to be politically correct here, that were really on our butts regarding trying to get some of this stuff done. One person from the outside actually joined that committee, and he was actually related to one of our staff members, to try and find ways to cut. When they got into there, they really didn't produce anything that was of value for us as a committee or as a board. So it kind of just went away, probably in less than a year it went away, right?
I think so.
The only thing I have with what you were saying of going more in depth with only a few board members is I would prefer every board member to be at that level of information instead of just a couple of them, because that's not fair to them, the rest of us, or whoever's on the committee, not to know what's going on in depth wise. So maybe it's a matter of increasing the information you give us to begin with. I really haven't seen much. If there's more information somebody wants, we normally ask, and it usually gets approved, but, you know, unless there's a specific task or a specific project that we're working on financing, like the solar project. You know, we put together a specific committee just for that project. I'm not quite sure there's a big need for it.
Yeah, I would almost take that approach where it's project-based. If we have another large, and not something like the roof, because that's a pretty standard project.
Right,
So
but
it's
if we had to
not-
look at building a new school,
Yeah,
or
something like
something along
that,
those lines, or a
or-
referendum,
Yeah.
or whatever the case may be, that really had to dig into finances.
And just to add to that, Dr. Glickman and I have already had conversations about increasing some of those reportings and some of the depth of those reportings. So that will be part of this, whether we form a finance committee or not. So that's work that we've already started.
With the tax levy presentation season approaching, that is the one area where I was thinking in terms of every year we do the tax levy, we have you know, the public come out, and it's you know, it's a difficult time. We hear a lot of stories from people who are hurting, and I think every year we talk about, you know, the need to do a better job of telling our story, about, you know, showing that we feel we are being good stewards of the money. And I don't know, this might, I don't think this really falls under the purview of the next committee on the list here, community engagement, but it's related, but it's more financial bent to it. But that's the only thing I can think of right now is a real pressing need from the finance committee point of view. And this might be a project, like you mentioned, you know, a project-based kind of temporary committee, is as we approach levy season, just to get together and talk about, you know, doing a better job of telling our story and helping people understand where we're coming from, why things are the way they are as it relates to the levy. That's the one thing that I would suggest.
Yeah, I mean, I would put that under community engagement.
You would?
Yeah. I mean, have John on that team, but that's, I mean, that's really what that is.
To me, it's a fact, it'll be interesting to hear what you guys, where it, you know, meshes with what you see
Right.
the remit as, but to me, it's community engagement, because we, you know, it's a conversation that we want to have, ongoing conversation, and I'd argue not just at levy time, but at budget time as well, and other, you know, big milestones that John has throughout the year, EBF, you know, just opportunities to have discussions about what comes in, what we do with it, why we do what we do.
Which I think we
you
did
know?
last year, didn't we? Or was it 2 years ago?
It was both.
Was it both?
Mhm.
I mean, so and I think we've actually gotten better over the years.
Yeah.
We can
Yeah,
always
we've
improve.
actually held community forums regarding
Yeah.
the tax levy, which nobody else, as far as the taxing body, has actually done
Right.
Did we do that
in
last
this
year?
area.
Yeah, just to publicly pat you all on the back. Theoretically, there's no.
Don't be too obvious,
We don't
bro.
have to publish.
No.
I mean, we go as a district based upon board direction. We go above and beyond what the legal requirements are in terms of having a whole hearing, publishing it in the paper, et cetera. So from a transparency perspective, that is something that we do the administration does based upon board recommendations, so.
And, you know, I guess this will fall to the next one, but, you know, telling our story, financially, we can also do that with the community engagement, and we talked about bringing back those board briefs and updating our website to make sure all that type of stuff gets pushed out on a regular basis.
Yeah, actually, we will be bringing back board briefs immediately, so information's coming from
And from a transparency perspective, as far as financial information, like taking the clip of John's presentation tonight and putting it on the website, or on Facebook or whatever, so that it's out there so people can see, here's our proposed budget for the year, and they get an explanation along with it, and, you know, just doing those things like that. Making John an internet star.
Even more than he already is. So it doesn't sound like
Yeah,
this board is wanting for us to.
Wait, Sean was, I think Sean was
Well,
just.
and maybe it goes into community engagement. I'm kind of curious on the scope of that, if it's getting too large, not knowing. the full
I'm starting
game.
to get nervous.
Like, well, and that's why I'm wondering, do we want to split some of that into, like, one would be communications, which could get into like web communications, how we present our, not PR, but, just our outward presence. And then you would have community engagement, which could get more into, I think, some of the other equity-based and social aspects of what we're trying to do with engaging community. That way you can divvy up the responsibilities a little bit so you don't have one committee overburdened.
I think another thing to think about is when there's committees, like Christy, I think you joined the diversity committee because that was something you cared about. And so our committees can be a pipeline for people to explore whether they want to run for the board or not too. And it might, we ran unopposed, the three of us. There are going to be 4 seats coming up in the next election. It might not be a bad idea to have some specific committees where people can go in with a specific interest. However we do it, but I do agree that there should be, if someone's really has 3 hours a week to spend or 2 hours, it would be nice for them to show up and say, this is what I can offer accounting, or I can offer this, or I can offer that, and just go straight to that targeted contribution area. So however we do it, the committees I do think serve that purpose, because that's how you got involved, right? And I did too, on the curriculum committee, so. And you too?
That's why I did diversity.
And I think there's opportunities with the foundation, there's other ways we can do it, but.
Should we talk about the community engagement?
Sure.
Maybe?
So Stephen and I have met a few times, and we've got a pretty comprehensive document. I haven't shared it with you yet because I still am reaching out to a few other people, but I've met with someone from 5 of our schools, and still have a couple people that I'm meeting with, in addition to the village, and next week I'm meeting with someone on the library board. My intent was to share something a little more comprehensive, but I can just send it to you now if you want, or I can pass this around. But it has a value statement that comes straight from ISB's, this book that we got. I can read it to you. It's a little cumbersome. Do you want to hear it or no?
Sure.
Okay. So it says the D46 Community Engagement Committee listens for the community's educational aspirations and desires, advocates for district improvement, and informs the committee of the district's performance so that the school board can actively involve diverse citizens in dialogue, deliberation, and collaborative thinking around common interests for our district's public schools. This document, which I know you can't read right now, is just a 1-page that explains what our key activities, at this point it's a draft, but will be or could be, one of which ISB suggests, and that's to have an organizational chart readily available to our community members so that when they have a question, they know exactly who to go to and what that person can and can't do. And then the next, anyway, this document just explains who's involved, what they want, what value the committee would add, how do we find out information, so that basically we could hand this to any prospective committee or potential board member and say, this is what we do. And then they can say, oh yeah, I want to dig in here. And then, so that's this 1-page document. The cover page of this includes the policies as they are now, but I think these may not have been updated for a while. It's directly related to the board's responsibilities, which is entering into joint agreements with other boards, and I won't read the whole thing, and then communicating our activities. So I need to look more carefully, or we can look more carefully, as how closely aligned this value statement is with the current board responsibility policy. The superintendent's responsibilities are a little more prescriptive, but they've seemed to, unless there's more that I've missed, focus more on print and broadcast media and public relations. And then there's some overlap, so it'd be good to talk. We can probably talk on Friday about that. Then this document, if you're familiar with the balanced scorecard, Christy, I think you and I have talked about it. which is just a tool, a strategy tool, where again, we could hand it, it's visual, you can hand it to anyone and say, here's our mission, here's our vision, these are the three foci that we're dealing with right now in this draft. I've got consistency and credibility, excellent discourse, and then equity. And then these, which Stephen and I are still figuring out, are kind of the strategy and how it relates so that we can get to what we're going to, get to the mission and the vision of the committee. So those tools are what we're using right now. The value statement, what else would be helpful to know?
Well, I guess we need to have some sort of direction what we want the committee to cover, right?
Scope, yeah.
So obviously, you were working on that grant that deals with
Yeah, we
community
didn't get the
grant.
grant, sorry. We did not, yeah.
And then, what other parts are gonna fall under that,
Right.
not necessarily, the board briefs don't necessarily fall underneath that community engagement, that's just something that the administration is gonna end up doing. The committee doesn't need to worry probably doesn't have to do anything with it,
Yeah,
unless we have something that we wanna actually push out through the board briefs.
when Stephen and I were talking about it, and Christy too, we talked about equity or diversity as being a lens through which we look at the strategy and one of the pillars, to make sure that decisions are being made with as many stakeholders' interests every step of the way. And so that's just how it's set up now. So I don't know how I don't know how those two integrate, but we were thinking about it just as a lens through which we can look at the.
And that becoming a dashboard of sorts is what we keep talking about.
Yeah.
Identifying the ways in which different members of the community can actively engage in the different things that we have going on. And being able to share not only the larger story that we're sharing, but actively be part of what's happening in the district. Am I phrasing that?
I think we're just circling around. I don't think
Right.
we've landed yet,
Right.
but it's definitely on, it is the second bullet, again, in this draft, is maintain a virtual dashboard of district engagement activities and progress towards strategic goals and sustainability. So
We're hammering down
someone
those,
can, yeah, so if someone says, hey, I want to help out with something somewhere in the schools, and my kid's starting kindergarten, they can pull it up online and say, here, I care about BPAC, I want to be a part of that, or I care about,
PTO,
networking or
yeah.
PTOs or whatever.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Another thing, speaking of PTO that's on this, and this is a little near and dear to my heart, is having some sort of leadership gathering with the PTO presidents. I think we have tremendous opportunity. There are some really talented women who are, and men who could be involved in their school buildings goings on. And it's just a great way to train in all kinds of things, like how to make an agenda, how to, assuming they want this, but in whatever skills they want, that could prepare them for board service as well, so that they get an idea of what the culture looks like in our school district. And then we also can set parameters and expectations of this. If you are going to serve in this way, you of course are going to be privy to information earlier than maybe would go out, for instance. However, you're not going to be dictating curriculum, and you're not going to, you can't, as one of the people that I talked to said, that doesn't mean you can skip the carpool line and just drive up to the front. So we can, we can set expectations so that there's no disconnect between what's going on and what someone thought they were going to get when they came in. But I think that would be something that I did try when I was on the foundation. We gathered once and it stalled a little bit because the technology was more complicated than I knew what to do with. But again, it becomes kind of a bridge between PTO to foundation to here, or something like that.
Okay.
So, as Sean mentioned before, where does because we do have things like outreach that we need to do regarding the budget and the levy and everything else. Does that fit into what you're talking about? And if not,
It could,
do we split that off, or?
I think it could, because one of the things I've heard over and over is, what are we doing? Like, where is our district going? I've heard it at the foundation level, I've heard it at the PTO level, I felt it myself. And it could be that we say, let's say we do monthly meetings with not just PTOs, but whoever wants to come. And then it could be an update on, hey, the levy's coming, so let's talk about levies. And here's, you know,
I mean,
from the
things you're
board's
talking about
direction.
Are things that can demonstrate the value that we provide to the community, and you tie that to the levy that everyone's paying for, and they get to, they better understand what they're getting for their money.
Yeah.
So anything that we can provide along those lines is going to be helpful.
I think so. And equip them to tell the story of our district too.
Yeah.
And I think by stakeholder, like I think, Christy, you probably already thought about this, that, you know, just who are all the different stakeholders, and some of those overlap. So there's like the taxpayer, but then there's affinity groups within the community, you know, so it's who are all the different stakeholders, what kinds of information, what kinds of outreach are we doing, what kind of engagement are we getting from those groups, and when we're making decisions as a board, do we understand the perspectives of all, you know, use that committee to say, do we understand all these perspectives, to make sure that we're not, have implicit bias in decisions that we're making too. So to me, it becomes like a stakeholder engagement and management
Absolutely.
venue, I don't know, a tool. You know?
I think also one of the things we did on the Fine Arts Commission is with the district art fair is have a participatory art installation at the library, which this last time stayed for a full month. And people just could, you can do it a lot of different ways. It's not expensive, but we did maps and just what do you love about the library? It could be what do you love about your school? And I've done it for 3 years in different places, at the summer days, at the library, and other places too, and at League of Women Voters meeting. And it's helpful because it gives you just it gets to more of the stakeholders. And if we did it at all district libraries, not just the Grays Lake Library, then we can reach out to people who live in Round Lake and Haynesville and that too, so.
Okay, so right now, Stephen and Christy, you're both on that. Was there another person on that? Do we need to put it, does anybody else want to serve on that? Will we leave
We've
it
been
then?
kind of, I mean, we're coming to your meeting on the 23rd for the diversity, so I think we're already working with the diversity committee.
Yeah.
And then I could use some direction on when you want to see the drafts of all this. Do you want to see it when it's kind of a done deal, and then there's a few holes? Do you want to see it now? When is the appropriate time to send it out?
Does it make sense to bring this back as an unfinished business item, at another meeting? Because I'm not sure I feel that I yet am able to give somebody an elevator speech of here's what the purpose of this committee is and here's what this committee will be doing.
That's what this is.
Right, so I think that's
But
what
that's
they're
not
working
elevator
on.
speech.
No,
That's
but
the whole
value
elevator.
proposition.
So maybe it's a matter of the two, right? If the two.
I think we I think we continue. I think
Yeah.
we have the next diversity equity committee meeting.
But that's a
right?
different committee.
Right,
And that's
but I
a
think-
superintendent's committee, right?
Right,
That's not a
right,
board
right. But
committee.
we're also using that as a lens through which we're informing some of this information, right?
So are you saying at the diversity committee, they could
So I'm
make a
thinking the next time
recommendation?
we update the board, I think should be not at the next meeting, but give us a
Following
little
one.
bit extra
Oh,
time.
give
you
us a little
mentioned that
time.
because you're going to be together then.
Right,
I
right,
understand.
right,
Okay.
that's all.
And then we will need a third member of the committee, right?
I would imagine so.
If it's going to be a
But
board
it could
committee.
be, it doesn't have to be, I mean, it doesn't have to be a board member.
Do they have to have 3 members?
I don't know, do they?
We usually,
Oh, I thought that.
if there was 3 members on it, we made it a
We
board
had to
committee
post
because
it.
it was the majority of a quorum,
Oh, I
which,
see.
So we had to
Right.
post those and.
right,
Also, right.
Oh, so it
Yeah.
could just be two.
Can just be us.
right.
And then it would become a superintendent's committee.
Right.
So it's called.
Yeah.
What is the difference between a board committee and a superintendent's
That,
committee?
just
Just
that.
what the amount of
Just
people that are
that.
The amount of
participating.
people, okay.
Because then you have to post it, and you have to keep minutes, and everything goes along with it if you have, you end
Okay.
up with a quorum of
Just
the
make it
board.
a superintendent.
Yeah, and so for example, the equity committee, used to be the diversity committee, now the equity committee is considered a superintendent's committee
Right.
because we don't have more than 2 board members on that committee.
Gotcha, okay.
Okay. So,
But am I hearing that what you want, do you want us to work into finance more explicitly than what we've got right now? Is that what I'm hearing?
No, I think it's just working on how we're gonna engage the community, and then those topics might be just part of the peripheral of what gets pushed out,
Gotcha, okay.
right? Does that sound
Yeah,
about right?
that makes sense.
Yeah.
so where do we go from here?
Forward.
Okay. Are we going to bring something back to this group again?
Yeah, you
I
guys
think so,
gotta, yeah.
but I think it would be at,
like,
One of
The
our
meeting after the
Okay.
next one, the
Okay.
first in October,
So-
yeah,
right?
and that would just
Community
be a
engagement will be a
refined,
superintendent.
a refined
committee.
definition of that gives us a
Okay.
chance to put in some
And so-
language and
Perfect.
Okay.
tighten that up, I think.
Okay.
So-
So actually, that brings us just down to having
Meeting.
a policy committee, Stephen Strack. So, are you back on that committee?
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. You know.
All right.
I had a question on the policy committee. Does that include any upcoming government, let's say, or legislative policy that might be coming and just engaging with different legislators, either state or federal, or is it mainly just our internal policy?
It's really an internal policy.
Do we want to have something that might be more external looking so we could maybe keep kind of a watchdog, because we don't get updates on the laws anyways that are kind of pending, and then just be a little bit more proactive and
Well, you should be, I know I've been getting email updates from
from my
the legislature, that tells us what kind of has been proposed
Yeah,
and
but
what's
like as
got
we
passed.
see them, then, we could have a committee and say,
Call
hey, do we
attention.
want to act on this and maybe influence or start bugging people about, if there are certain mandates or whatnot?
We've
Something a
done that
little
in
bit
the past
more
where we filed witness slips with the state for different things where, excuse me, where, like, when Chris was here, he'd say, hey, we should be filing slips against this. And he would ask us to file slips against it, and he'd explain why. Or Ellen would give us, an idea that, hey, this isn't where we want to go as a district and as a state, and then can you file slips so we can be engaged? I think we can continue down that type of path.
We can, and I can add in, has this district ever been a part of EdRed?
Of what?
EdRed?
So, I have a meeting on Friday morning with some members of EdRed. And their goal is to support school districts through the process of being politically active. So, of course, it's not free, or I would have already signed us up. So I'm going to be meeting with them but I have been involved in EdRed in the past. So I'm going to be meeting with them at 8 o'clock on Friday morning. If there is a board member who's interested in joining that conversation, you'd be welcome to join me, so let me know if you're interested in doing that. But that, Sean, could kind of, if we were to choose to do that, that could feed that interest as well.
I think that work should be under the Community Engagement Committee myself.
Almost got that out with a straight face.
Another guy.
Christie's over here going, why did I get on this board?
Okay.
They cover everything?
I think so.
Is
So
it
really,
edred.org? Is that the website, Lynn?
Say it again?
edred.org?
Yeah,
Okay, thank
What
you.
time is your Friday morning?
8 o'clock.
8 o'clock?
8 o'clock. But if I'm going to have more than 2 board members, then I really need to know, because then we've got to do something about that, right? So I don't know that we can do that, have more than 2, probably. So
Are there 2?
I don't know.
I might be able to, but
I'd be
I
I
interested.
can't do 8 AM now.
Oh.
But I wouldn't
Well,
wanna-
But I
here's
can bu-
another option. If you guys if there are a number of people interested, I can have the first round conversation with them. I can report that out to you, and perhaps we can have them come to a board meeting.
well, they're just giving a presentation on the stuff, right?
Yes.
So it's really not a meeting.
No, this is not this is
It's not a
about,
meeting, there's
this
no-
is about, this is what EdRed can do for our
So I'm not sure we
schools.
need to actually worry about that.
Oh, in terms of having people come?
How many people
be-
come?
Oh,
Because it's
sure.
not a meeting, it's a presentation for them to
It's
give us
information.
information.
Correct.
There's gonna be no decisions, so no
Correct.
basically board talk.
That's correct, there will be
It's
no board talk.
just giving some information as far
I
as.
promise you, no board talk.
Well, I'm not sure we need to worry
I
about it.
don't think so. I mean,
Great. All
That's
right.
my interpretation, but I'm no lawyer. I'm a
err on the
fireman.
side of caution maybe, but I don't,
No, I think you're
you
right.
know. I mean, we can be in the same room together,
We just can't talk
Right.
about business.
we just
Can't
Right,
talk board
so
business.
actually, it's
It
just
doesn't-
like showing up at a
The equity
legislation
thing we're
dinner.
next week.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I mean,
Okay, so they will be thrilled to have more people to talk to than just me. So who will be joining me?
Can we check our calendars?
Yes.
it was 8 a.m.?
8
AM.
Sorry.
Well, I'm just,
AM.
only reason I ask is that I can't
US.
make 8 a.m. Yeah,
Yes,
I can't do
8
that.
a.m. So Christie is yes, and.
I'm a
anybody
maybe.
else? And a maybe. Okay, great. Okay, if there's anybody else who's interested and can join us, just
Is it
shoot
the
me a
district office, Glenn?
Oh, sorry.
It's
At
at
the
the
DO.
district office?
Yes.
Okay.
You're looking?
No, I'm just putting it in my calendar, right?
So
So
that
you're,
sounds
oh,
like a
you're,
yes.
you're a yes also?
I'm in.
Christie E. Okay, great. All right, while people have their calendars out,
I didn't have mine up.
well, I don't know. Jim, Jason, and Steven, we have to plan our first policy meeting of the year. Do you want to do that here at this table, or do you want me to send you a little Google
When were you looking?
survey? So do we usually do them at 6 a.m.? 6 a.m.
Hello.
I'm not doing it at 6 a.m. I don't get up at 6 a.m.
Is that good?
Sure.
So we want to have that meeting either this month or the very beginning of October. That's what we figured out, right, Sue? Having to do with when we need to post our next round of policies. How long have those meetings typically been for this group? Do they last more than an hour?
Not
No, usually
typically.
No? Okay, because I'm going to be at the foundation meeting on October 1st here at 7. So if that night worked at 6 o'clock, then it'd be just right before the foundation meeting,
Tuesday the 1st?
October 1st.
Yeah, I mean, I can do that.
Is that good? It's too easy. Really?
There you go.
Okay.
See how easy we are?
That is amazing.
I don't sound bad. I'm just saying anything else.
All right, so topics for future agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Topics for future agenda items.
All right. So we have John, a budget hearing, yeah. We're gonna bring, we bring a little slideshow. O&M is gonna do a little summer project slideshow for you, so you can see the wonderful work that has been done this summer. I don't think I have anything else.
We talked about something, now I gotta remember what it was.
Oh, was it about the administrator and the salaries report? Was it that?
No.
No?
I'm drawing a complete blank.
Okay, all right.
I'm getting old, what can I say?
Well, we've got time.
Yeah, I'll
We've got
think of it.
time. We'll add them.
It was something we talked about the other day when we were talking, setting the agenda. Yeah, those notes. Spending plan, that's what it was. The spending plan for the tier funding.
Yes.
Is that on your
Yeah.
list of?
Yep, yep,
Okay.
yep, yep. Yeah.
I knew there was something. I just had to get there.
Yeah.
I have one that's been on my mind, and I'm not sure what the board, I don't know that the board has a responsibility, but we might have an interest, which is, you know, we've seen communities where literally kids have been wandering streets after their parents have been raided by ICE. And I don't know what the risk is in our community, but I assume that
It's not zero.
potential
Yeah.
reality. And I wouldn't say, what are we going to do about it? But I'd be really curious to know, are there,
Support groups or.
yeah,
support
is the community ready? There are students, you know what I mean, that we care about.
I think Dr. Diaz has some things to say back there.
But you're right, it's not a zero, absolutely not a zero. And one of the things that I went to for the records conference, they talked about like when and what records schools have to give, what kind of curriculum.
It's like a document from the.
Christie, can you hand her a mic?
Yep. Oh, I have one right here, don't I?
Court orders.
We're gonna put some microphones.
I need to start over? So basically, one of the meetings that I went to, put on by ISB, had lawyers and things like that come in, and they talked about exactly what kind of documents schools are able to release in their time frame, and then what kind of warrants we need to look for, and then they gave a flow chart about exactly, just exactly what to do. If they come with a warrant that looks like this, or a warrant that looks like that, what our responses are. So those things I can respond to. I don't know exact percentage, and it's not my business to find out how much, but I know for sure that it's not a zero.
So what support groups do we have in the community as a whole?
Right.
For the kid that gets left on the street because mom and dad got picked up during the day and now they can't get it home? There's something for us?
I mean, there might be church groups who
Neighbors.
who are preparing for that potential need to be filled, but I guess the question is like, do we know, and I don't want to create work for the board, but I'm just thinking, boy, it'd be great to know that there are some plans in place so that we can help get people connected with them if our students need it.
It's probably community engagement, right? Beat you to it, Jay.
Here's the community engagement list.
Buried under a mountain right now.
So along that line, headlines in the paper have talked about cannabis and what our policies are going to be. That's something else I think maybe we want to start thinking about is I'm hoping elementary school kids won't be smoking in our
Too late.
halls. But
I can certainly share with you that we'll be getting updates from press first.
okay.
So I think probably it'll make sense for us to get those recommendations and then see how they work for us.
Because it's January, right? January 1st, I think.
Yes, I'm pretty sure that's going to be in that group of things that we're looking at. But to your question, an interesting question. I do wonder if we might have some staff members who do have kind of a handle in the community that could be helpful to us. So I think our administrative team can put our heads together to find out how we can gather information.
Yeah, even if we put together a resource list that says,
Right.
maybe at one of your BPAC meetings, and have a resource list of here's people that can be around to help in the event that something happens, and they can pick it up or if they need it, or they leave it. At least that's something in their hand.
I know we've got pads, right? Be on that list. And then are there a lot of family safe families?
Yeah, PEDS only typically works.
They take families. I don't
Take
think
families. I
kids
don't think they're
can
gonna take
show up by
individual
themselves.
kids.
I don't
But
think
there's
so.
safe families. That's a program too that I
Yeah,
not
so
foster, but
maybe it's something to put together a list, a resource list.
yeah. Okay.
We'll work on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you for bringing that up, Christie. We'll work on it.
Any other topics?
So look into it.
I was curious if we want to, again, I don't know how the board feels about this, but having some sort of sustainability, I hesitate to say community, but just some sort of discussion about our carbon footprint and what we want to do, if anything. Even if it's just doing an assessment. I'm taking the first of class in a master's program in sustainable management to talk about how triple bottom line, and one of the first class I signed up for was to look at buildings and what an assessment will look like. What are we already doing? Clearly, we're saving some money on solar panels, so it might not be a bad idea to have something.
Yeah, Keith could probably give you a good update, because I know they put in LED lights. They've done a whole bunch of different cost savings as far as energy savings
Right.
type of things, since we've been here. There've been a whole bunch of changeovers and all that. Like, one of the ones they did is they put in a smaller boiler at one of the schools so that it would just maintain, instead of having the big boiler have to run all day long.
Yeah.
So that it increased that lifespan and cut down on the energy that we were using. So I know we've been doing some of those type of energy savings projects. I think that goes along with your lines, but I think maybe Keith can probably give us an update on.
I'm wondering if there's some way, there's so much energy in this district around sustainability right now and climate change. It might not be, I've actually put it on this community engagement and taken it off back in. So, I don't know, does it fit here, does it not? So, just something to.
There's energy in the calendar, that's for sure. I know Lake County Community Board
That's
has
why, yeah.
been really pushing hard on it and trying to lead the way, so.
Yeah, and CLC has quite, it just seems like a really nice opportunity to align our civic engagement.
And, you know, as we have
Partnerships,
these,
we've been looking for like partnership areas that are actually
Right.
in our scope, so. maybe we'll look into it.
and I wonder if these kinds of topics may come up through our strategic planning process that we'll be talking about, so. All right.
And I was wondering, would we be interested in issuing a challenge to, as schools getting started and the different schools have different school, or not schools, why am I blanking now? Not PTO, the kids, the student
Councils?
Student council,
Yeah.
thank you.
Oh.
That's nice. I love that too, but student councils, thank you. Would we want to invite them here to kind of issue a challenge of coming up with something like a project that they actually have to do and implement, what can they do to improve their schools and increase attendance at our meetings, and but just kind of to give them some experience in government, and then have them actually do a practical application.
Sure, they could come run one of these meetings.
Board president for a day.
There you go.
Would there be interest in doing something like that?
Even if it's just asking high school kids to come back through it as a mentor
As a
to,
mentor to the
yeah.
student councils, you can do that too. But just something to think about. Again, we don't have to, but something to think about.
I mean, we have student government at our key board meetings, it's all the way through, so I think it'd be cool.
So I'm trying to keep a list of what we're
Good
talking
luck.
about at our next meeting.
Some of those last ones don't have to be at the next meeting.
Yeah,
It's just something to be
Yeah.
on the agenda, be on the,
and, okay, future.
The future
Okay,
site.
that's what okay, so, next meeting, we have the EBF spending plan. We'll have some, we'll have information to share with you about that in some way. John's doing a budget hearing, that's for sure. Keith is going to do an O&M summer project slideshow. I think those are what we had for sure for next meeting. In addition, our administrators will work on a list of finding information of resources for students whose parents aren't here. I'm not sure we'll have a list at the next board meeting. I'm not sure if that's actually a board report or just a request for us to work on. Okay, not really a board report.
No.
Okay, and then I heard an interest in learning from Keith more about what our sustainability activities have been. Maybe that may not be for next meeting, but in the future.
No.
Okay. All right. Did I get it right? Yes? I got it all? Yes? And something about student council, but I'm not sure what yet.
Not yet. Well,
Okay.
we'll
More
formulate
to
it.
come.
We'll
More to
workshop
come.
it.
Sean has an idea brewing about student council.
Student engagement.
And community engagement in the future.
And community engagement
That's next.
together.
Right.
I heard that.
But in the future,
Right.
that'll come back.
Right.
Not next meeting, the one
Yeah,
after,
sure.
right,
Right.
okay.
Okay. And actually,
Clear as
for
mud.
what it's worth, the meeting after the next meeting is our first October meeting, which is going to be our board workshop. So we'll only have one actual business meeting in October, in mid-October, so you've got all the way till then.
Okay.
So did we decide on a date for the board workshop, or are we using a board meeting?
We're
Board
using a
meeting.
board meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's already in my.
Yeah.
And is that a public,
So I think what'll happen is that we'll open up as a public meeting, and then we'll go into closed session.
gotcha.
That's how we've done it in the past.
Yeah. All right.
All right, back to public comments. Our one audience member left. The only thing I do want to remind everybody is on the 21st is the Foundation and Barn Fest out at the fairgrounds. So it should be, hopefully we got nice weather, but at least it's underneath the roof, so.
I'm glad you mentioned that. At last night's foundation meeting, there was so much talk and excitement about it, And then also a reminder that, oh, people sign up at the last minute, so they'd love people to sign up as soon as possible, and remember, there will be axe throwing.
At what?
Yeah, at the board president.
Yes.
Why are the teachers all lined up?
Yeah, I'm sure I want to be done.
I'm on duty, so I'm not, at this point, I can't make it.
Your place then?
Yeah, maybe. At this point, I'm not gonna be able to make it, but unless I get a trade.
Too much stuff, you don't want to be there for that.
That's right.
Yeah. Sorry, that was probably a bad comment, I'm sorry. It's only a joke. All right, next is we're going into closed session
We
to discuss superintendent goals. So I need a motion to go into closed session.
Second.
LaCroy,
Aye.
Mackey,
Aye.
Miller,
Aye.
Mack,
Aye.
Strack,
Aye.
Weedman,
No.
I
Braden.
see what he did there.
Aye. I didn't. I put him as a name.
Yeah, a little bit of fun.